The man in the navy uniform reached for his cuffs like he'd done this a dozen times before. Audrey tilted her head, pulled her badge from the inside of her coat, and said, "Calm as a lake. You're going to want to think very carefully about your next move." The second guy, beard too trimmed, radio too quiet, froze just behind him. His hand hovered near a sidearm holster that wasn't regulation. Not even close. Their patrol car didn't have county plates. It didn't even have a legal light bar. I stepped out onto the porch, phone already recording. "Those badges real?" I asked. "Because this one is." I turned the screen to show my wife's name in the official personnel database of the city's police department. Active Chief. You should have seen the flicker in their eyes. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. The taller one, who had introduced himself as Officer Denton, looked like his wiring had short-circuited. I didn't blame him. The HOA hadn't told them she was law enforcement. They probably thought she was just the cop's wife, not the one who wrote the training manual on civilian impersonation. Name's Darren Slate. I investigate financial fraud for a living. Not for a badge, not for a title, just for truth, and for what's mine. My father built this house 30 years ago, laid every inch of that deck with calloused hands. My wife added the new wraparound ramp for my mother after her stroke. ADA compliant, professionally permitted. The only reason it didn't have HOA approval was because Marcus Langley never intended to grant it, not to us. Marcus runs Ridgepoint's HOA like he's gunning for governor. Every rule a weapon, every exception a business transaction. He never liked the idea of someone like me, someone with records, living inside his little kingdom. When the fines didn't break us, he tried fear. But today he sent men in fake uniforms to arrest my wife in her own driveway. What he didn't know was that the porch Audrey built for my mom wasn't just lumber and permits. It was the last promise I made to my father, that we'd take care of her here, that we'd keep the house as he left it, safe, open, and ours. And now they were threatening that promise. Over a ramp. Let me be clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was calculated. HOA notices delivered by hand at night. Anonymous calls to zoning enforcement. And now, this stunt. 2 men with expired licenses pretending to carry out a court order that never existed. Because Marcus thought intimidation would finish what bureaucracy hadn't. But today proved something else. Marcus overplayed his hand. You don't bring a fake badge to a home guarded by a real one. Where are you watching from? Because this is the part where they start running out of moves, and I start counting every mistake they've made. I haven't filed my complaint yet. I haven't turned over the footage, and I haven't called in favors from the forensic lab I consult for yet. But I will, and when I do, this won't just be about a porch. It'll be about a man who tried to use authority he didn't have to silence people he couldn't control. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. We're just getting started. The notices didn't stop after the fake arrest attempt. If anything, they multiplied. 3 more envelopes arrived in the span of 2 days, each with increasing penalties, each with bold red stamps that made them look official. Final notice. Pending lien. Violation 6. A. Non-compliance. All for a structure already reviewed and permitted by the city. But this wasn't about legality. It was about control. Audrey handed me the stack without saying a word. She didn't need to. I could feel the tension in her fingertips as she passed them to me, jaw set tight. Not in fear, in quiet fury. Marcus had made it clear that he wasn't finished. It wasn't just us either. Neighbors were whispering. Mrs. Calder, 2 houses down, had her gardening shed flagged as a visual disturbance. Lewis Trans solar panels, fully approved by the utility company, were now reflective hazards. The HOA wasn't enforcing standards anymore. They were inventing them. The community bulletin board, once filled with potluck invites and dog-walking schedules, had become a battlefield. Newly printed rules were pinned with thumbtacks like threats. Changes to the bylaws appeared overnight. No votes, no signatures, just declarations. And people were scared to speak up. I saw it in the way Mr. Patel waved from across the street, smiling but never walking over anymore. I saw it in the way the Johnson twins no longer played in their yard, their basketball hoop gone, replaced by fresh turf and silence. Ridgepoint Estates was becoming a gated whisper. When I confronted Marcus directly after the arrest stunt, he didn't flinch, didn't deny anything either, just looked me in the eye and said, "You brought this on yourself. Undermining the board's authority? There are consequences." He said it like it was policy. Audrey had tried to stay hands-off. She always did. She said there were lines she didn't want to blur, lines between her office and our front yard. But after they came for her with fake badges and made my mother cry from her bedroom window, she stopped pretending this was a civil disagreement. She started checking things. HOA registration with the state, missing audits, suspicious expense reports that listed security consultations and community enhancement fees. The more we looked, the more it smelled rotten. But we were still just two voices, and Marcus had a board full of yes men and silence-purchased allies. That's when I remembered Ellen Rowe. Ellen had always seemed different, quiet at meetings, but sharp. She didn't vote with Marcus as quickly as the others did, and she was his niece. Something that had once seemed like nepotism now felt like leverage. If anyone knew what was happening inside the boardrooms before the rules hit the bulletin, it was her. But I didn't want to push her. Not yet. I needed to understand the game Marcus was playing first. So I watched. 2 nights later, I spotted him leaving a neighbor's house just past 11. Not a friend, not on a call, just standing in the front yard, talking fast, gesturing at the house, and handing something over. I waited until he left, then walked over to check in. Ms. Rivera answered with bloodshot eyes and a mug of tea clutched tight. She didn't say much, just that Marcus had suggested she repaint her home trim or face escalating neighborhood impact violations. The thing was, her trim was already Ridgepoint beige. I'd helped her repaint it last summer. She whispered the word harassment like it might get her evicted. That night, Audrey said it out loud. He's running a racket, one violation at a time. And it hit me. This wasn't just about enforcing rules. Marcus was using the HOA to pressure, isolate, and extract. Whether it was forced updates, fabricated fines, or threats of liens, it all pointed to the same thing: financial pressure. If you couldn't afford to fight, you gave in. If you refused to play along, he'd raise the stakes until you did. But we weren't giving in. Not with my mother stuck inside, afraid to walk onto the deck she waited a decade for. Not with my father's name still carved under the railing he built. And not with neighbors too scared to speak their minds. I looked at Audrey. She was holding one of the violation notices, the paper trembling just slightly in her fingers. Not from fear, but from restraint. We weren't just going to expose him. We were going to end whatever empire he thought he was building. The next HOA meeting was closed door as usual, but I didn't need to be inside to know who said what. Ridgepoint's clubhouse had thin walls and thicker shadows. I parked in the far corner of the lot, cracked the windows, and listened. Marcus's voice carried first, sharp, smug, practiced. This is what happens when we allow exceptions. He built without architectural review. He meant Audrey, of course, used intimidation to dodge protocol. This is exactly why enforcement matters. Then a pause. Then Ellen. Her voice was low, quieter than the others, but not unsure. Except the deck was permitted, through the city. ADA approved. A beat of silence, a shuffling of papers. "You're defending them?" Marcus snapped, too fast, too loud. "I'm citing facts," she replied. I leaned forward instinctively, eyes narrowing. Another board member chimed in. Frank, if I recognized the tone right. "Look, all I'm saying is maybe sending those guys wasn't the best call. We're lucky it didn't go public." Marcus's reply was pure poison wrapped in charm. Those contractors were following directive. Community safety enforcement is part of our mandate. We acted within procedural bounds. Lies, but well-rehearsed ones. The meeting went on another 20 minutes. By the time it ended, the board members trickled out one by one, stiff smiles for each other, eyes down when they passed me. Except for Ellen. She stopped mid-step when she spotted me in the corner spot, then adjusted her bag on her shoulder. Her face flickered between neutral and conflicted, like her instincts were fighting protocol. She stepped over anyway. "Didn't think you'd be parked out here," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I'm thorough," I replied. She glanced around, then leaned slightly closer. "You recording that?" Number I didn't need to. That surprised her. She blinked and finally looked at me. "You know, he thinks you're trying to blow this place up from the inside. I'm trying to stop people from getting crushed under it." Her jaw clenched. I saw it, right there. The tiny twitch in her fingers, the catch in her breath. The internal battle of someone who knew the truth, but hadn't yet decided what it would cost to speak it. "He's my uncle," she murmured, "and I know how that sounds, but he wasn't always like this." "That's what scares me." She shifted her weight like she was about to walk away, then stopped. "What they did to your wife? That wasn't board sanctioned. Was it reimbursed from the HOA budget?" Silence. "I can't, not yet," she said, backing up a step. "You don't have to, not yet. But when you can, don't come to me. Come to Audrey. She's not just wearing a badge, she knows what lines can't be crossed." Ellen gave me a long look then, and for a moment, I wasn't speaking to an HOA secretary. I was speaking to someone torn between blood and conscience. When she turned and walked away, I knew I'd just lit a fuse. The next morning, our mailbox was stuffed again. This time, it wasn't just notices. It was a printed flyer titled Neighborhood Integrity and Enforcement Proposal. On it were proposed amendments that would give the HOA full right to override any city-issued permit if it violated community aesthetics. Audrey picked it up, read it in full, then handed it to me with a single word: desperation. Marcus wasn't backing down. He was digging in. But now, we weren't the only ones noticing. Mrs. Calder left a handwritten note on our porch. "You're not crazy. They threatened my daughter's lease too." Mr. Tran waved me down by his driveway, whispering about sudden demands to repaint his roof tiles. The community was waking up. And Ellen? She hadn't said another word, but I noticed she didn't vote at the next meeting. Just sat there, stone-faced, hands folded in her lap, lips pressed shut. Her silence screamed louder than any speech. One way or another, she'd have to choose soon, and when she did, it wouldn't just be her uncle at risk. It would be the entire foundation this board stood on. The next blow didn't come through mail. It came through the zoning office. Audrey and I were at the kitchen table, her reviewing shift logs, me categorizing invoices for our fraud consultancy, when the call came in. The woman on the other end introduced herself as someone from county zoning, her tone brittle with bureaucracy. She informed me that a complaint had been lodged about commercial activity occurring in a residential home, namely mine. I nearly laughed. "You mean my desk, my phone, and a whiteboard?" She didn't sound amused. "We're obligated to investigate any filed report." The moment I hung up, Audrey muttered, "Marcus is flailing." And he was, but not randomly. The zoning report wasn't just about making my life inconvenient. It was tactical. My business, quiet, online, harmless, was the only thing in our household not explicitly protected by city permits or federal law. By targeting that, Marcus was trying to weaken our foundation, divide us, hit what he thought was my softest point. He didn't realize I made a career out of unraveling pressure systems just like this. The next day, a formal violation was hand-delivered, this time by an HOA contractor who wouldn't meet my eye. "Unlicensed business operation on residential property," it read, citing outdated ordinances buried deep in Ridgepoint's original covenant documents. Documents I'd already scanned 2 years ago, out of curiosity. And I remembered what those clauses led to: liability exposure. I stood on the porch holding that paper, hearing the soft creak of the ramp beneath me, feeling the way it had settled into the land. I knew I was being baited. Marcus wanted me to lash out publicly. He wanted escalation he could weaponize. Instead, I went inside and pulled up our insurance disclosures. If Marcus wanted to play legal roulette with zoning laws, I'd make sure he also got the full attention of our homeowner's insurance carrier, who would not take kindly to HOA interference that risked triggering a breach of use clause. But I wasn't done. Later that week, as I walked down toward the cul-de-sac where the Tran family lived, I noticed something odd near the back gate of Ridgepoint, a half-finished cement pad next to the maintenance shed. It wasn't new, but it hadn't been there a year ago either. A few faded tarps covered stacked containers, and the entire setup looked unofficial. I asked Lewis about it. He shrugged. Marcus said it was for emergency storage, said not to worry. I did worry, because that wasn't on any HOA annual project list I'd seen. No budget line item, no community vote. And Lewis said it casually, like Marcus had normalized operating, without oversight. That night, Audrey and I sat on the porch, her sipping ginger tea, me sifting through the HOA's last 6 financial summaries. I spotted it. One line. Private security consultation, Q3 discretionary fund, $8,220. Exactly 1 week before the fake arrest attempt. I looked at her. You see it? She nodded. They paid those guys with HOA funds, which meant Marcus didn't just send private security in as intimidation. He used communal money to do it. If the other board members knew, they were complicit. If they didn't, they'd soon be forced to choose between exposing him or going down with him. Audrey leaned back, arms crossed. He's not just abusing authority, he's laundering it. The next day, I sent a polite email to the city's Zoning Oversight Board requesting clarification on HOA enforcement boundaries and their relationship to county permit law. I CC'd the planning department and the HOA's legal representative. No accusations, no fire, just facts and pressure. Marcus responded within the hour. Not directly, of course. He issued a public notice through the HOA bulletin, declaring a reminder of enforcement protocols and a vague threat about unauthorized zoning activity. It was desperation again, camouflaged in letterhead. But the cracks were beginning to show. Neighbors started approaching me, not in whispers, but with quiet nods and half-formed questions. They weren't ready to speak, but they were done pretending. And somewhere inside that tightening circle of fear and silence, Marcus was beginning to lose his grip. Because once fear starts to slip, so does power. And I had a plan to finish what he started, by showing everyone just how far he'd gone. The moment of clarity came not from some hidden file or dusty drawer, but from the lens of a camera I'd installed 2 years earlier. It wasn't even meant for surveillance, just a wide-angle security cam mounted above the garage, angled more for packages and neighborhood kids roughhousing too close to my mom's flower beds. But after the fake arrest, I'd reviewed every minute of footage from that morning. The footage started ordinary enough. 2 men stepping out of a black Dodge Charger with magnetic decals that read, Neighborhood Enforcement Authority. The decals were new, shiny. I paused the frame, zoomed in. Not a single department seal or county designation. But what caught my eye wasn't their uniforms. It was what happened after. After Audrey flashed her badge, after they hesitated, one of the men turned and muttered something into his shoulder mic. I pulled up the audio stream, enhanced it. The words were muffled, but audible. Tell Marcus we have a problem. He didn't say the HOA. He didn't say the board. He said Marcus. Direct chain of command. No formality, no buffer. I isolated the timestamp, then checked the feed from the driveway cam facing the street. Same moment. Blue Lexus parked halfway down the block, Marcus's car. He never got out, just sat there, engine running, watching. He was there the whole time. That was all the proof I needed. Audrey stood behind me, arms folded tight across her chest as the footage played back. She didn't say anything, but I saw the moment her jaw shifted, subtle but final. She'd seen enough. By that afternoon, she was on a video call with the State Inspector General's office. I'm not filing a report, she told them. Not yet. I'm notifying you of potential misuse of private enforcement personnel by an HOA board using municipal-style authority. Her voice never wavered. The call was flagged for internal review within 10 minutes. Meanwhile, I started cross-referencing the HOA's quarterly budgets with transaction records available through the Municipal Association's public disclosures. Nothing about the Neighborhood Enforcement Authority appeared in the vendor lists, but a shell entity did. Ridgepoint Community Oversight Services, LLC, formed 6 months ago, registered under an address that didn't match any Ridgepoint office because it was tied to Marcus Langley's private development company. So now we had motive, method, and paper trail. Marcus wasn't just weaponizing authority, he'd created a shadow entity under the HOA's nose, funneled funds to it, and used it to terrorize residents. That enforcement visit? It was a paid intimidation stunt, and it was paid for by the very people he was targeting. Audrey and I sat at the dining table again that night, staring at the structure she'd helped build for my mother, the one they said broke aesthetic guidelines. She traced her finger over the wood grain of the porch rail, silent. "They tried to put me in cuffs in my own driveway," she said, almost absently. "Do you know what happens if I don't react fast enough in that moment?" I nodded. "They'd have a headline," she continued, "and Marcus would have used it to justify every crackdown he's planning next." "But now we have his headline," I said. "One we can write." We were no longer reacting. We were building a case. The next morning, I contacted a friend at a compliance litigation firm and asked about protocol for whistleblower protections within HOA governance structures. He asked me one question: "Do you have someone on the inside?" I thought about Ellen, about her hesitation, her silence, the way she hadn't voted at the last meeting. She was close to the edge. "Almost," I told him. Then I pulled up a blank folder on my desktop and labeled it Langley Oversight Archive. Inside, I placed the footage, the vendor list, the company registration, the HOA budget discrepancy, the audio clip, everything. One by one, the puzzle pieces were falling into place. And I hadn't even played my strongest card yet. Because Marcus didn't just break the rules. He made the mistake of doing it in front of a woman trained to dismantle criminal networks, and a man who follows money like a bloodhound. And we were just getting started. I heard the cane before I saw her. The soft, determined thud of rubber meeting wood echoed from the hallway as my mother made her way out to the porch, one careful step at a time. She didn't say anything when she sat beside me, just exhaled slow, steady, and full of history. Her fingers ran across the railing like she was memorizing its texture. "Your father would have laughed at all this," she said, "called it HOA nonsense and gone back to hammering." She turned her gaze to the street. "But he didn't live to see them come for our dignity." That hit harder than I expected. She'd barely left her room since the arrest attempt. Not because she was weak, my mother was anything but because she hated being seen in fear. That ramp, that deck, it had become more than an access point. It was pride, independence, the thing she could walk across without help, even if she had to grip both rails to do it. And now, Marcus was threatening to take it from her again. Audrey joined us a few minutes later, still in uniform. Her expression was unreadable, but her stance wasn't. She was locked in, ready. "They're calling an emergency meeting," she said, holding up her phone. "Marcus wants a vote on a new disciplinary clause for residents under investigation." I blinked. "He's writing retaliation into policy now?" "Seems so, and he's moving fast." We sat in silence for a beat before I stood and walked back into my office. I opened the file folder titled Langley Oversight Archive and stared at the evidence we had. It was enough to cause a stir, enough to trigger state-level review, but not enough to guarantee a takedown. What we needed now wasn't more data. It was a confession, a first-person leak. Someone to connect the money, the enforcement stunt, and Marcus in one clean line. Ellen. She was the fulcrum. The next morning, Audrey suggested we walk to the community garden. It wasn't an act of leisure. Ellen volunteered there every Wednesday before board sessions, usually alone. The garden sat tucked between two retention ponds, with raised beds lining a gravel path and a single shaded bench in the center. It was quiet, forgotten, perfect. We didn't ambush her. We just showed up, offered to help weed the tomato plot, and worked in silence. It took her nearly 20 minutes to speak. "I saw the footage," she said. "The real one. I had to dig for it. Marcus tried to wipe the server, but I found a backup." Audrey kept her hands in the soil. "And he was in the car, listening to the channel. He coordinated the whole thing." That was it, the break. Ellen sat back, wiping dirt on her pants. "You were right. He's not operating on behalf of the board anymore. He's using it as a shield. And now you have to decide if you want to be part of the cover-up," I said quietly. She didn't snap at me, didn't flinch. She just stared at the ground like the weight of it all was pressing down through her spine. "If I go forward," she said, "he'll burn me. Not just in the HOA, professionally, family too. You don't have to come forward, Audrey said, voice even. You just have to give us the key. Ellen looked at her, eyes narrowed. What kind of key? Server logs, budget access, board correspondence. She didn't answer, but I saw it in the way her jaw moved, the internal calculus already at work. Not if, when. That night, Audrey and I sat on the porch again, this time watching my mother slowly walk the length of the deck, unaided. She gripped the rails, yes, but her pace was steady. She's doing better, Audrey said. No, I replied. She's getting tired of being afraid. So were we. Because this wasn't just about zoning or fines or bylaws anymore. Marcus had turned a community into a threat zone. He'd faked authority, misused funds, and terrorized the people he was supposed to protect. And we were done playing by his timeline. Ellen showed up at our door just past 9 p.m., hoodie up, a folder pressed tight to her chest. She didn't wait for a greeting, just stepped inside the moment Audrey opened the door. I didn't email it, she said. I didn't even print it at home. I used the library. She set the folder on our dining table like it was radioactive. Inside were 3 things. First, a digital printout of Ridgepoint Community Oversight Services LLC's expense ledger. Payment records showed 2 transactions, each over $4,000, billed to the HOA's discretionary enforcement fund, and paid directly to a shell account managed by Marcus's development firm. Second, a board-wide email from Marcus dated 2 days before the fake arrest, marked confidential, detailing external enforcement action approved as discussed. Attached to it was a forged citation template labeled Neighborhood Security Detail. And third, a single line item from the HOA's annual budget, hand-annotated by Ellen in red ink, showing the same payment relabeled as grounds enhancement. That was the bridge. That was the line between minor corruption and criminal fraud. I couldn't stay quiet anymore, she said, arms still folded tightly. But you can't use my name. Not yet. Audrey nodded. This is enough. We'll take it from here. Ellen didn't sit. She didn't linger. She just nodded, turned, and disappeared into the night like the weight had finally tipped off her shoulders and into our hands. Once she was gone, Audrey locked the door and stood over the folder like it was a sealed indictment. This is enough to bring in state oversight, she said. And with it, internal audits, prosecutorial review. I stared down at the ledger, then at the fabricated citation. He used HOA funds to create a fake arrest. Warrant. That's not just misuse. That's impersonation of law enforcement and financial malfeasance. 2 felonies, she said quietly. We scanned the documents into my encrypted drive, uploaded them to a private legal server, and sent a secure file package to 2 trusted contacts, one at the district attorney's office, one at the Inspector General's review committee. Both were flagged urgent with an internal escalation note from Audrey herself. Then we waited. By morning, the message had been received. Audrey's contact in the DA's office confirmed they were initiating a preliminary inquiry. Her tone over the phone was clipped but serious. Don't tell anyone you've submitted this. The moment he senses it's coming, he'll start covering tracks. It was too late for that. Later that same day, Marcus posted a notice to the Ridgepoint Community Bulletin, his boldest move yet. He announced the formation of a Neighborhood Behavioral Oversight Committee, a volunteer group tasked with observing, documenting, and reporting homeowner activities that may be deemed disruptive to community values. Audrey read it out loud, then lowered the paper. He's building a surveillance network. No, I said. He's preempting a panic. He knows what's coming. And the cracks were spreading. Neighbors began knocking. Mrs. Calder came first, then the Patels, then Louis Tran. Each one brought a variation of the same story. Warnings, threats, escalating notices, and unexplained fees. Some had paid. Others were too scared not to. One woman admitted to repainting her entire home 3 times in 4 years, just to stay off the radar. We recorded every story, every name, every invoice. The neighborhood wasn't just fed up, it was ready. Audrey met with 2 other officers behind closed doors. By the end of the week, they had compiled a report for the city's Civilian Oversight Committee with the full documentation of impersonation, misuse of enforcement language, and suspicious budget allocations. All we needed now was a trigger, and it came sooner than expected. Ellen texted Audrey a single line. "He's calling a board meeting Monday. Off record. He knows something's coming. Good. Let him feel it. Let him scramble to fix what he didn't realize was already beyond repair. Because the next move would be ours, and it wouldn't come in a letter, or a meeting, or a warning. It would come in a voice he didn't expect, in a room he didn't control, with consequences he couldn't talk his way out of." Monday morning came quiet, too quiet. No notices on the door, no cars idling near the curb, no new HOA postings. It was the kind of silence that only meant one thing. Marcus was working behind closed doors, trying to pull strings faster than we could cut them. I didn't bother checking the board meeting agenda. Ellen had already warned us it was off record. No minutes, no transparency. Just 7 people in a room, scrambling to figure out how much time they had left before the floor caved in beneath them. Audrey had spent the night reviewing the latest report with the DA's office. They were preparing a formal letter of intent to investigate. Not charges yet, but enough to send a ripple through Ridgepoint once it landed. Our job was to make sure that ripple turned into a wave. I got to work pulling together the last phase of our response. Not just legal evidence, optics, impact. I compiled resident testimony, structured a timeline of board actions, and overlaid them with HOA budget entries that proved a pattern: false citations issued, followed by unapproved payments to the Shell LLC, followed by a spike in resident compliance through fear. But it wasn't just what Marcus did. It was how he got others to let it happen. That's why I included the board voting records, not to indict the entire group, but to show who voted with him, and who didn't. Ellen's silence would be her shield. She hadn't resisted out loud, but she hadn't enabled him either. The others? Their names would come up in any audit, whether they realized it or not. I encrypted the package under a new project title, HOA_overreach grid, and synced it to Audrey's internal network access for law enforcement referral. Then we took one last step. We called the insurance carrier. Audrey handled the call, crisp and direct. "We're submitting documentation showing intentional interference with ADA-accessible structures by the HOA governing board. As our carrier, you need to know these actions could constitute a civil risk to residents under federal protection." She paused, then added, "And the misuse of HOA funds to impersonate police is part of that documentation. Their legal department requested a copy by end of day. Not a warning, a promise. Once a carrier smells liability, they don't ask permission. They move to protect themselves. And once insurance starts sniffing around, HOAs bleed money trying to hide." By dusk, Audrey had briefed her internal contact in the city oversight office and shared the folder. That triggered a mandatory ethics review, small but formal, and enough to escalate us to the county. The only thing left now was setting the trap. I emailed Marcus that evening under the official homeowner records request protocol. Pursuant to Ridgepoint HOA Bylaw 4.8a, I'm requesting access to all vendor contracts issued in the past 6 months under discretionary funding. Please confirm receipt. His reply was quick and curt. Per Section 7.4c, requests must go through board approval and are subject to committee discretion. This request is denied. Perfect. I saved it immediately. Because 7.4 degrees Celsius doesn't exist. The Ridgepoint bylaws stop at June 9th. Marcus had made up an entire section of the charter and signed his name to it. And that, more than anything, told me he was panicking. He knew we were closing in. Ellen confirmed it. Later that night, in a whisper call from the community garden shed. "He's talking to a lawyer, private. He's telling the board he's stepping back temporarily for health reasons, but he's still running everything behind the scenes." "Good," I said. "Let him hide." Because while he was planning his retreat, we were preparing a scene. The board's next public meeting was in 3 days. Residents would be invited. Questions would be allowed. And I intended to ask mine, on the record, with evidence in hand, in front of every neighbor he thought would stay quiet. Audrey looked over the printout I handed her and gave a single nod. "This'll be the last meeting he chairs," she said. "No," I replied. "It'll be the last one he controls." 3 days passed like the eye of a storm, still but humming with pressure. The day of the meeting, Ridgepoint looked unnervingly polished, lawns trimmed, flags hanging evenly. Not a single violation notice in sight. But beneath that suburban calm, everyone felt it. The pressure, the questions, the fact that too many people had started asking what exactly the HOA was doing behind the curtain. I watched from my porch as neighbors walked toward the clubhouse, slower than usual, in clusters instead of solo. Whispers passed between them like static, low, cautious, charged. Whatever hold Marcus had maintained through silence and intimidation, it was beginning to fray. Audrey wore her uniform, not out of pride, but clarity. She wasn't going to hide behind concerned homeowner anymore. She was a sitting police chief, and she had evidence of criminal impersonation and financial fraud. It was time Marcus remembered that. We arrived early to set up. Ellen had secured a corner near the back wall where the recording equipment sat idle, unplugged, accidentally forgotten by the board. So I brought my own, a discreet mic, a pocket-sized camera with a wide lens, and a secondary audio recorder clipped to the underside of the podium. Everything synced, everything time-stamped. Marcus entered 10 minutes late, flanked by 2 board members and wearing the air of a man who thought he could still bluff the river with a pair of 2s. He smiled wide, waved, told a few neighbors it was so good to see them showing up to support the community. I sat in the 3rd row with the folder on my lap and every page memorized. The meeting opened with the usual procedural fluff, budget updates, neighborhood beautification funds, and a pointless reminder about overnight parking violations that hadn't been enforced in months. I waited. When the floor opened to resident questions, I stood slowly, the mic already warmed in my hand. My name is Darren Slate. I live at 112 Beckley Way. My wife is Audrey Slate, chief of police for this city. And I have a few questions for the board. Marcus shifted in his seat. Not visibly, not enough to cause panic, but his eyes locked on me with sudden alertness. I continued. On October 3rd, my wife was approached by 2 men claiming to be officers with neighborhood enforcement. They carried no verifiable credentials, no legal summons, and issued what appeared to be a forged citation in violation of both state and federal impersonation statutes. Murmurs swept through the room like a low gust of wind. I clicked a small remote in my hand. A slide lit up the wall behind me. A still frame from our camera footage. Marcus's car parked down the street during the attempted arrest. I spoke clearly, calmly. The men were contracted through a private entity, Ridgepoint Community Oversight Services, LLC. That shell company was registered by Marcus Langley through his personal development firm, not the HOA. And the payments made to that company, totaling over $8,000, were authorized under misrepresented budget line items labeled as grounds enhancement. More noise now, people turning, whispers sharpening into sentences. Additionally, I continued, flipping the next slide, when I filed a formal homeowner's request for vendor transparency, I was denied under a bylaw clause that does not exist. The section Marcus cited, 7.4c, is fictional. The Ridgepoint bylaws end at 6.9. That's when Ellen stood up without being asked and spoke 3 words that landed like stone on wet glass. He forged it. The silence that followed wasn't stunned. It was breathless. Ellen pulled a printout from her own bag and walked calmly to the front, placing it on the table. I've served on this board for 3 years. I believed in the mission. But I can't protect lies, and I won't protect fraud. This is the full vendor record with annotations. I've made copies. They're with the state attorney's office. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't even blink. He just sat there, color draining from his face, as if for the first time, he realized there were no more doors to run through, no more policies to twist, no more silence to hide behind. And we weren't done yet. The board meeting dissolved into chaos. Neighbors stood, some shouted. A few demanded Marcus resign on the spot. But he didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't move. He sat stone still, fingers laced tightly, eyes locked on a fixed point in the distance, somewhere past consequence, past recovery. Audrey stepped forward, her voice clear but controlled. This meeting is now part of an active investigation. Anyone with additional documentation or testimony should speak with me directly after. A formal inquiry has been initiated by the district attorney's office. The silence that followed was heavy. Not confusion, not hesitation. It was the stillness of people realizing the game had changed, that the man they'd trusted to maintain community order had weaponized the very rules meant to protect them. Marcus finally stood, not in defense, not in defiance, but in resignation. "I won't dignify this with a response," he said. "This is political theater." He turned to leave, but not before Audrey held up a small black device. "The moment you stepped into this building, Mr. Langley, everything was recorded, including your refusal to answer." He paused at the door, hand on the knob. "You're not law here." She didn't raise her voice. "I don't have to be. The law is already watching." He left without another word. Frank, one of the board members who'd stood beside Marcus for years, looked like he'd aged in minutes. "I didn't know," he muttered to Ellen. "I swear to God, I thought those payments were real." Ellen's reply was cold. "You didn't ask." Outside the clubhouse, the air was electric. Neighbors clustered in tight circles, sharing stories, comparing notices, trading suspicions that had long festered in silence. I watched from the steps as people began putting puzzle pieces together in real time, and still I wasn't finished, because one final loop had to be closed. That night, I submitted a formal complaint to our homeowner's insurance provider. Attached were scanned copies of the forged citations, budget discrepancies, and Ellen's annotated documents. The subject line was simple: unauthorized use of HOA funds, risk disclosure notice. By noon the next day, they responded with a clause citation I knew by heart. If any member of the HOA board is found to have engaged in fraudulent or criminal activity that increases liability exposure, the policy may be restructured or revoked. That was the pressure point. Not emotion, not outrage, money. Audrey sent a follow-up to the city's civilian oversight panel. Her message was blunt. The Ridgepoint HOA knowingly authorized a private entity to impersonate police personnel. At least 2 residents have filed ADA discrimination claims tied to enforced aesthetic policies targeting accessibility structures. Within 48 hours, a formal inquiry letter was posted to every home in the neighborhood. But the final move? That came from within. Ellen called an emergency board session the following Friday. Marcus didn't show. 2 board members resigned via email. Frank showed up in person, hands shaking, and voted in favor of appointing an interim oversight committee, including 3 non-board residents. They appointed Ellen as temporary chair. She didn't celebrate. She sat behind the desk, took a deep breath, and looked me straight in the eye. "I'm not fixing what Marcus broke," she said. "I'm burning it down and rebuilding it right." We stayed late that night, helping her box up years of old files, most of which had never been opened, hidden budgets, half-written amendments, bylaws that had been updated without vote. She handed them to me without hesitation. "Scan what you need," she said. "Let the truth live outside this building." By the end of the night, the clubhouse lights flicked off for the first time in, years without Marcus holding the key. And somewhere beneath Ridgepoint's pristine hedges and identical rooftops, something had shifted, subtle but final. Fear had changed hands. The public hearing was held in the Ridgepoint Community Center gym, neutral territory, large enough to hold everyone, bright enough to keep things honest. Folding chairs lined the space in orderly rows. A podium stood near center court, beneath the HOA's blue and white seal, now slightly askew. I arrived early, dressed plainly, no folder this time. I didn't need it. The facts were already in motion. By 6 o'clock, the room was full. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years now shared chairs. Couples I'd only ever seen behind drawn curtains were leaning forward in their seats, arms crossed, eyes locked on the podium. The change was visible. This wasn't just a meeting anymore. This was judgment. Ellen opened the session with a controlled voice and a prepared statement. Tonight, we address the breach of trust committed by former Vice President Marcus Langley and those actions carried out under his direction. Evidence has been submitted to the City Attorney's Office, the County Ethics Board, and our insurance provider. Several of those investigations are now active. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't need to. Everyone was already locked in. She continued, "We're here to establish accountability, not to assign vengeance. What happens next, how we rebuild this board, this community, is in our hands." The first resident to speak was Mrs. Calder. She held up 3 letters, all dated months apart. "These notices fine me $450 for a gardening shed that was grandfathered in under the old covenants. I paid every time, because I thought that if I didn't, they'd take my home." Her voice cracked on the last word. She sat down to a round of steady applause. Next came Louis Tran. "Marcus had me repaint my roof tiles, said they were non-conforming. I looked it up later. My shade of gray was literally in the HOA handbook under approved tones, but by then, the paint was already drying." One by one, the testimonies came. A single mom fined for her daughter's therapy swing. A veteran threatened with a lien over a backyard ramp. A retiree who lost sleep for weeks thinking he'd missed a permit deadline that never existed. And then it was Audrey's turn. She stepped forward, full uniform, badge visible. No flourish, just calm presence. "I was targeted with a falsified enforcement action. 2 private contractors approached me outside my home in full imitation of law enforcement. Their credentials were fabricated, their authority non-existent. They attempted to arrest me without warrant, without cause, and without any legal standing." The room went dead still. They were hired using Ridgepoint HOA funds through an unregistered vendor shell. That makes every board member who signed off on that budget personally liable for fraud, impersonation, and potentially civil conspiracy. I say this not as a threat, but as a fact. She paused. "Because when you carry a badge, you don't get to pick and choose what the law means. And neither does your HOA she return to her seat without fanfare. Some people clapped, others didn't, but every head was nodding. Then finally, Ellen returned to the podium. "I'd like to move to dissolve Ridgepoint's current enforcement charter under Article 9 of the Covenant. This would immediately suspend the HOA's authority to impose fines, initiate liens, or issue property citations until a new board is elected under revised oversight and legal review." She looked to the audience. "All in favor?" The sound that followed wasn't a cheer. It wasn't even a shout. It was a rising wave of voices. Yes, 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 layered, resolute, irreversible. Even Frank raised his hand. The motion passed unanimously. I watched Ellen sign the interim order with a black ink pen, her hand steady, her face unreadable. One sentence erased years of quiet tyranny. And just like that, Ridgepoint became something else. Not perfect, not immune, but awake. And when I stepped outside, the porch lights along the street didn't feel like surveillance anymore. They looked like homes again. The first nail went in just after sunrise. I stood on the porch next to my mother, who held the wood plank steady with her good hand, while I hammered the commemorative plaque into the edge of the deck railing. The metal plate was simple, brushed steel, unpolished. Just a few words etched in block lettering. "For those who refuse to be silenced, Ridgepoint belongs to its people." She read it twice before touching the edge with her fingertips. "Your father would have been proud of this," she said. I believed her. After the public vote, Ridgepoint changed fast. Marcus had vanished from the neighborhood, moved out in the middle of the night, according to someone on Beckley Way. His house sat dark and empty, a "for sale by owner" sign stuck half-heartedly in the lawn. No one touched it. No one wanted it. It stood like a monument to every quiet rule he'd ever twisted. Ellen had kept her promise. The enforcement charter was suspended, the private security contracts voided. A legal advisory panel was formed with 3 residents and 1 external consultant. Every major decision now required open meeting votes. No more surprise notices, no more boardroom secrets. And the best part? The porch stayed. Audrey had fought to have it recognized under ADA protection, and with her help, we submitted a community-level amendment that protected all accessibility structures from aesthetic override. It passed unanimously. That alone would have been enough. But the real victory came quietly. Neighbors started stopping by again, not to whisper, but to talk, and to thank, to ask questions. Mrs. Calder baked a pie that tasted like apology. Louis installed new lights over his ramp and offered to help others who might need the same. Even Frank stopped by, hands in his pockets, voice a little unsure. "I missed a lot," he admitted. "You looked the other way," I corrected. He nodded. "Not anymore." There was no dramatic reunion, no parade, just something better. Momentum. Audrey went back to work the week after the vote, but something in her posture had shifted. She walked a little taller, a little slower, like every step grounded her. Like she didn't have to carry the weight of proof anymore. That had passed into action, into structure, into change. And me? I took down the folder from my office shelf, Langley Oversight Archive, and slid it into a locked drawer. We'd kept a copy for the state, for legal insurance, for the record. But I didn't need it sitting in my eyeline anymore. We didn't need reminders. We had resolution. That night, we hosted a small gathering on the deck. Nothing official, just a few neighbors, some iced tea, a grill we hadn't dared fire up since the HOA's noise complaints started. We laughed, we swapped stories. And for the first time in a long time, no one glanced over their shoulders to see who was watching. Audrey leaned into me under the porch light. "Think this place will be okay?" "It already is," I said. "It's just got to remember how to stay that way." And if you've ever lived in a place where silence became fear, where rules were used to divide instead of protect, then you know exactly how much it means to take even one step back toward belonging. This wasn't about winning. It never was. It was about reclaiming the ground under your feet. It was about telling the people who think power makes them untouchable that they don't get to define your home. They don't get to define you. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from, because you're not alone.